very much, Mikael. And then the last session, but not the least one, from this session is Brian O'Gallagher, who is the chair of the IEA ETSAP Exco. So please, Brian. I can't say that floor is yours, but it's yours anyway.
Thank you. Can you hear me, Tina?
I can hear you, but I can't see your slides.
Ah, okay. This went away from the shared application.
No, there you are.
Excellent. Okay, well, thank you very much, Tina, for the introduction, and I'm delighted to be here. This is a different type of presentation. It's kind of reflections on the last number of years, and I'm not going to talk about methodology. Certainly not going to talk about rather energy systems methodology. It's more about the methodology or the process of trying to translate the results of what we do into policy informing, taking the results of what we do and how we use those to effectively inform policy decisions. So initially, I'll talk through some of the experiences we've had with using our modeling to inform policy decisions, and then gives, I think it's 7 tips from that experience. So here's a snapshot over the last number of years. This first report was in 2013. Our research in energy systems modeling started in 2008. So a lot of the first 5 years was about building capacity and then using that to develop policy relevant analysis. So in 2013, we developed Ireland's first low carbon energy roadmap. And this was used in Ireland to inform and give confidence, in fact, for the legislation on climate action in 2015, because we showed with our modelling tools that an 80% reduction in CO2 emissions was technically possible. And this gave the policymakers comfort in terms of making a decision to legislate for climate action on that basis. We also supported our government in 2014 then in developing a response to the European Union in terms of an engagement with the Commission around what Ireland's targets should be for 2030. And that resulted in a target that was agreed for 2030 that took place in 2014. And of course, now across the EU, similar negotiations are going to start regarding increasing the ambition for 2030 in line with the overall ambition that the increase in ambition that the EU has set for 2030. We moved then to support other aspects of energy policy, things like energy poverty, energy security, again, using our modeling tools. And this was in 2015, and this led to the informing Ireland's white paper that was published later that year. The same analysis that we did for this white paper also then was used to inform Ireland's energy research strategy. And that was an interesting one from our perspective, because it's not just energy and climate policy that our results have been used for, but also for research policy. And more recently, it's not in this slide deck, more recently I found that our analysis has also been used to inform the public expenditure code. So now when decisions are made about public expenditure, particularly in infrastructure, they have to take into account the greenhouse gas emissions, associated with that infrastructure and the associated costs. And that analysis was also based on some scenario analysis that we did. In 2017, then we did some analysis to inform Ireland's first national mitigation plan. So this national mitigation plan arose from the climate legislation that I mentioned earlier, where the legislation called for, if you like, a national mitigation plan to be published. And that was subsequently published in July of that year. More recently then, the government in Ireland has been looking to increase its ambition for climate mitigation. And we did some analysis in 2018, and I'll come back to a particular example of where we saw that analysis appearing. But that was used to inform Ireland's climate action plan that was published in the middle of 2019. And earlier this year, we did some further analysis because the different government parties were discussing how they might form a coalition. And we had a new government that was formed earlier this year, and they established a programme for government, and our analysis fed into that. So as you can see from this, over the last number of years, our energy modelling analysis has been used to directly inform policy decisions. And I'll go into just a couple of details, a couple of examples of how that manifests itself in practice. So I mentioned this report that we did towards the end of 2018. This was something that we submitted to our Department of Energy and Climate Action. And then we saw this tweet from our Minister for Climate Change. He attended the COP23 meeting, and we had a closer look at this tweet that he submitted, and particularly we had a look at what he was reading. And when we zoomed in and we looked at the graphs, we saw that he was actually reading the document that we had submitted to the department. So this was a very useful example of how our material can reach even the minister's desk, and that was quite comforting. Another example relates to European Union renewable energy policy. In 2014, the EU agreed on the ambition for renewable energy of 27% by 2030. We did some collaborative work with IRENA, and that was prompted by the collaboration with ETSAP and IRENA. It followed on from that, where we looked at the remap modelling, in particular the power system analysis associated with that. That analysis fed into a joint publication by IRENA and the European Commission in 2018. And that showed that the European Union could increase its renewable energy ambition. And indeed, then the European Union subsequently decided to increase its ambition for 2030 from 27% to 32%. So it was nice to see our analysis underpinning this EU decision. We've also had experience in informing the global policy analysis. The Paris Agreement had this ambition to go to well below 2 degrees. Of course, there wasn't much analysis at that stage as to what that meant. So we published some work in 2019 as to what that might mean for Ireland. And we also included parts of that analysis into a book with other ETSAP partners on this, effectively comparing different national approaches to meeting deep decarbonisation. And this was cited in the IPCC report on 1.5 degrees, as there had been quite few examples of national deep decarbonisation that was published up until that point. So that gives some examples of some of the success we've had in informing policy, but I want to talk about now where that comes from. So this is the 7 steps from my perspective. The first one, which is the key one, is to build capacity. I've been very fortunate in terms of the team that I've been able to attract to UCC to come together to develop the modelling tools and to use those to inform policy. I'm not going to go through the detail of this, but what I would point out is that the first analysis we did that had significant impact was in 2013, but that wouldn't have happened without what's captured here as phase 1 and phase 2. So this building of capacity is a key dimension from my perspective, from my experience, in terms of what we need to do if we want to have impact in terms of policy development. Capacity alone within a group is not enough. So from the start, we've been very successful and very fortunate in terms of being able to collaborate with different partners. And I'm delighted Alessandro is in this session, because I do want to I suppose emphasize the support and collaboration we've had throughout this process from Inforsma. But you can also see some of the other collaborations we've had, be it from academia and from energy systems analysis, but also different companies, communities more recently, and also then a range of government departments and agency. So that collaboration has been very important, and that would be the second key step. The third one is that it was very important for us throughout this process that when we were doing analysis, to get it peer reviewed. Now, this is not because policymakers read peer-reviewed journal papers. My experience is that they don't. But it is important for them to know that the analysis is scientifically robust, and peer-reviewed literature gives that sense of confidence that the things that we are saying, the advice that we were giving, the results that we were showing, and the insights for policy is drawn on very strong science, very strong research that's peer-reviewed. The fourth step is to reach out. And this is one of the tricky ones. I mean, as energy systems modelers, sometimes, well, of course, ETSAP is a broad church, and some of us work in academia, as I do. And there can be a tendency in academia to focus on publishing and to stop there. From our experience, if you want the results to have impact in terms of policy, you need to reach out. And this involves a lot of travel. And in our case, mostly that's been train journeys, because we're based in Cork, train journeys to Dublin, which is the capital of Ireland, which is where a lot of the government departments are based. I found this picture on the internet. I do have to say, though, just in case people are wondering, that we don't always have sunny weather in Cork, or in Ireland, rather. So it's not always an enjoyable trip, but a lot of times it is. Another part of reaching out is this range of engagements we've done nationally and internationally, inviting people to Cork, going to either abroad, speaking at events. And you can see a wide range of activities here, from stretching from Cork to Kazakhstan. And this part of the this reaching out is really important, so that we let the policymakers know that we're there, and that we have something useful that they might be able to make use of. Another part of reaching out is in terms of, in addition to peer-reviewed publications, to actually translate the research results into accessible pieces of information. And we've done a lot of blogs, articles on this particular vehicle is called RTE Brainstorm. Our national communications channel have set up a web presence where academics can try and share their analysis. But it has to be simplified, it has to be made accessible, and so that's another skill that's required in terms of having an impact with the research. The fifth example of things to do, things that I would suggest, is to simplify the analysis. we're very familiar with bar charts, with pie charts, with all sorts of charts. The policy makers are not. So we need to make it simple if we can. So this is one example. This is Ireland's greenhouse gas emissions in a particular year. And I wanted to kind of get across here, how do we emphasize the non-ETS emissions, because that's the part that the government has a mandatory target to achieve. So one way is just to talk about it in terms of the percentage split between non-ETS and ETS. Then we can expand that further in terms of the sectors, the individual sectors that contribute to ETS and non-ETS emissions. And then we can highlight the piece of the greenhouse gas emissions that's associated with the mandatory non-ETS targets. Now, anyone from outside Ireland, any other member states, will see clearly from this that the significant challenge we have in terms of agriculture, because agriculture represents more than a third of our greenhouse gas emissions and nearly half of our non-ETS emissions. And most of it is, the products are exported, but the cows do their belching in Ireland. And then we have these things like cloudbursts, and we add in pictures to show that if we want to address greenhouse gas emissions in the non-ETS sectors, we need to focus on cows, cars, trucks, and homes. So it kind of gives a simplified message of where the emphasis should be. And this is important in an Irish context because most of the policy, most of our success is in the area of electricity. Another part of the simplifying is something we've done more recently, which is to develop infographics. So to take the information and present it not only in an accessible way, but in an attractive way and in a way that will actually resonate with policymakers. And this is also an important part of what we found is required essentially in order to communicate the results effectively, to also highlight areas where policy is not focusing on and perhaps needs to be. Another part of the sort of development that we've undertaken is to animate the results. So not only to show charts, but to actually be able to show visually how trends have happened over time. And this has been very useful in terms of, for example, here showing the significant growth of fossil fuels. And also, you know, a lot of the discussion recently has been the phenomenal growth of wind and solar, which is correct. But when you look at it in the context of primary energy, it's significantly reduced. And this isn't really playing properly. There's another part of this animation, but in the interest of time, oh, here we go. So when we start to then present the challenge associated with decarbonisation, it makes it quite stark. So it brings home the reality, if you like, of the challenges that are ahead. So animation. And the last piece then is engagement in a timely manner. So we rejoined ETSAP after starting our capacity building. And then, as I mentioned, and this reverts back to the first slide where I showed the different pieces of analysis then that we were able to do to inform at key times the important policy decisions that the government was undertaking. So that finishes my slideshow, Tina, and essentially what I wanted to get across was, as I say, some of the, based on our experiences, some of the processes, not in terms of modeling, but in terms of translating the modeling analysis and using it to inform policy decisions. So I hope that was useful. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. I think that was extremely useful. There are many key lessons. I think that everybody who is working, especially with the policymakers, should take and consider from your presentation. What especially from our context, this has been especially the lessons learned from our side is that even though you are writing the reports for the policymakers, still go with the peer review articles, because that will help afterwards a lot, because there are a lot of discussions. People are not have the same opinion about the scenarios and the results, but then it's very important to showcase that this is really peer-reviewed and scientific basis in this analysis. And the other was important, I guess, that is how really to visualize the results. But from your perspective, how is it when you are talking with the policymakers? Are they really, in that sense, deep in the context that, as an example, if you talk about residential energy and what kind of energy consumptions they are for net zero energy buildings, as an example, because I think this is an example when I've been struggling with the policymakers, because they think that buildings don't expect people are not consuming anymore, which is not the case.
Well, that's very true. What I find, I suppose when we started on this journey, we would show bar charts in terms of the emissions reductions in the residential sector, to take that example. And then we would show the fuel mix associated with that. And for us, this makes total sense. You know, we can see what's happening when we look at emission reductions and fuel mixes. For most of the policymakers, in my experience, it meant absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
They wanted to know, well, how many houses do we need to retrofit? What grants do we need to put in place? Who pays? How do we deal with those who are in energy poverty? How are we going to fund it, and what policy measures should we use to develop it? So their questions are very different from the research questions that we tend to ask. So that translation of the research results into policy insights, it's still very much, from my perspective, a learning process on my side. But the key thing is the engagement. If we don't engage with them, we don't know what their questions are. And we continue to speak different languages almost. We talk about different things. And so that's the key part of that, I think, is continual, constant engagement, you know, just knocking. And initially it took a lot of train journeys, because they have so little time and so much, they're under so much pressure. So why would they meet with somebody who wants to talk about modeling analysis? So it took a lot of effort, but now they come to us. So it's paying off, you know, it achieves that result. So we still haven't got the communication right, from my perspective. It's still a journey, but I have noticed that things like the infographics and simplifying the message, and of course there's always dangers in simplifying the message. Like the results Jane showed earlier, there's huge uncertainties in what we're presenting, and that's a key challenge. But it really, the dialogue needs to be there. We need to be better at communicating, and they need to be able to make time available to actually engage with the, they don't need to use times, but they need to understand broadly, ideally, the you know, what the inputs, changes that on the inputs and how they affect the outputs, and what the outputs mean, the significance of them.
Yeah, definitely. I think there will be a lot of issues to be discussed, but maybe later. So there was one comment in the chat that love the graphics, Brian, really useful. So I fully agree.
Thank you, Rachel.
So I would like to thank all the presenters, and we are a little bit late from the schedule, but there is still 5 minutes before the start of the next session. So thank you for everybody, and see you after 5 minutes.
Thanks, Tina.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tina.
Thank you.